My name is Arnold Rogoff. I moved into the ICB. That is, I moved my business into the ICB about 31 years ago. And for the first 10 years or so, I noticed Walt. One could not help but notice Walt, but usually I saw him in the halls. He always had his paint-bedeckled smock on and a sailor's cap, and very frequently he was coming back from Molly Stone's with a bag of food. And after a few years of this, we would nod at each other occasionally. And approximately a decade after we moved into the building, we went to his studio at one of the open houses. And we were just dazzled. His art just took our breath away. And I spoke to Walt quite literally for the first time that evening. It was a very brief conversation, perhaps 1 or 2 minutes. I complimented him on his work, and he was sort of a pshaw, oh, it's nothing kind of fellow, and he probably moved his foot around a little bit like that, like in the cliched vision. But about 3 or 4 days later, when things slowed down a bit, my wife Janet and I went back to his studio and visited it, and spent some time with Walt, maybe an hour or hour and a half, and we then picked up our first oil painting of his. And Walt and I talked a little bit, not about his work. Actually, in the 20 or so years that I knew Walt and we became friends, we very seldom talked about his work. We talked a lot about art and artists and influences and different types of art. And we talked about things that Walt really loved in addition to art. Literature, film, music. Walt's likes and his wants apparently were quite simple. He lived a simple life. He lived a happy life. But after we purchased our first oil painting of Walt's, he would occasionally come down to our space down on the first floor. There'd be a rap on the door. I'd open it. Walt would come in. And I remember the first time he came in, he was wearing his cap and his paint-smeared smock. And in the middle of our space is a very large table, which we use for a variety of things. And Walt sat down at a chair around it, and he looked all around our shelves. And we're book dealers. We deal in rare books. And he then got up and just browsed. We didn't have any kind of a conversation. And he was there perhaps 15 or 20 minutes. He said goodbye, and then about 2 or 3 weeks later, he came back. And over the years, a habit, a very pleasant habit, developed. Walt would come by about every 2 to 3 weeks, generally in the afternoon. And about that time, I realized that in the small refrigerator that I kept in the space in the freezer compartment was a bottle of aquavit. So it became a ritual of ours to have a sip or two of aquavit during Walt's visits. And during this period of time, Walt became our local celebrity, and people gathered around him, and ladies sat on the carpet in front of him, which he enjoyed very, very much. And they asked him questions, and he talked about his life, and he enjoyed himself. Over the years, Walt's visits became a bit more frequent to our space downstairs. One aquavit bottle after 6 months or so was replaced by another, and on and on. And I looked forward to Walt's visits very much. We still never, or won't say never, seldom spoke about his art. We talked about art, but not his art. Walt was not that anxious to talk about his art. But he did talk about a lot of other things. I remember the joy, the pure unadulterated joy of his announcing to me when he was going to take a trip to Paris. I guess it was about 15 or 17 years ago, something like that. And he was gone, about 3 weeks, something like that. And he had a great time. He stayed in a little hotel in Montmartre. He visited the museums he hadn't seen in decades. He visited his old haunts. And about 2 or 3 days after he came back, there was a rap on the door. Walt came in, And he regaled me, and this is the first time and the only time this ever happened, when he regaled me for about 2 hours telling me about his adventures in Paris. One day, about, I'm going to guess a dozen years ago, Walt came downstairs, and he didn't knock on the door, he just walked in. And I saw Walt as I'd never seen him before, because he walked in smiling, a huge smile, almost literally from ear to ear. He walked in, he plopped himself down at a chair at our big table, and he said, 110,000. I said, oh, okay. And he said, 110,000. And I said, 110,000, Walt, 110,000 what? He said, $110,000. I said, well, that's a pretty impressive figure. What does it mean? That weekend, the prior weekend, he had had a one-man show at the Sausalito Women's Club. And the total sales for the weekend of Walt Kuhlman's works were $110,000. Now, Walt had never experienced anything like that in his life. He was accustomed to critical praise, but he never achieved the kind of commercial success, not that he lusted for, but it was nice to have an acknowledgement that even those who weren't artistes appreciated and showed their appreciation by buying his work. I have never seen Walt quite so happy. And he stayed not too long, about 45 minutes or so. As he walked out, I said, Walt, good seeing you, thanks for coming by. He turned around, and that smile was just pasted on his face. He was a very happy fellow. Now, Walt has been celebrated justly so for his art. And it's great art. And I'm no critic, but I think it's wonderful. But my memories of Walt, my strongest memories, are not as an artist, but as a friend. A reticent friend, not a conversationalist, but someone who had extraordinary depths, who had great interests, and who was really an awful lot of fun to be around. As will you, I too shall miss him.